Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. Napoli, Milan, another big game in Serie A with Napoli claiming all 3 points and keeping pace with Juventus. How did they do it? Where did Milan go wrong? And are we seeing signs of improvement from Gattuso's side? Don't worry, here at the interviews, we've got you covered. So on this edition of the interviews, we're going to break down how Napoli came from behind to beat Milan. So Napoli against Milan, a big game in Serie A. Napoli looking to keep pace with Juventus. Milan looking to win their first game of the Serie A season. However, when we do break things down in today's video, one, we're going to talk about how both sides played without the ball. Two, how Milan played at the back where there was a risk or how it did lead to a reward. And three, how Napoli came from behind to win the game. When we do break things down, we have Napoli in a 4-3-3, Milic up front, out in wide areas, Insigne and Callejon, and in midfield they went with Zielinski, they had Alon, and they had Hamšík. We look at AC Milan, how do they line up? You have Higuain up front, out in wide areas, Borini and Suso in midfield, Bonaventura, Cassi, and then they have Lucas Biglia. We think about how Milan lined up without the ball, dropping off into a 4-5-1, playing pretty narrow, ensuring that Napoli can't play between the lines, obviously, but Napoli's movement wasn't really accustomed to that. They weren't really dropping off. Mertens wasn't there to drop off and have runners playing behind. Milic was kind of staying up top by himself. You had Callejon playing quite narrow. You had Insigne playing quite narrow. Milan were fine with this based on the fact that they had Higuain up front, who did pretty well with his back to goal. When you look at the game, there was one time where he just had the ball. He was able to hold off his marker, then run past Koulibaly, which led to a foul, and countless occasions in the second half, able to just drop off, link play with his teammates, then push forward. Whether they did amount to chances, it did help Milan soak up pressure and then push forward into Napoli's half, so he did well there. And in terms of the midfield battle, they had Bonaventura watching Alan, they had Cassi stepping towards Zielinski, and then if they had Hamšík on the ball deeper, if Higuain wasn't there, they would hope that Biglia could push up and press him as well. So they were fine in that regard. When the center backs had the ball, sometimes you would see the shuttlers push out just to kind of apply pressure to them as well. But in terms of it as a whole, Napoli didn't really create chances in that first half. They couldn't break the lines. A lot of their chances stemmed from wide areas, and they stemmed from those wide areas based on the fact that Suso and Borini weren't getting out fast enough to press the Napoli fullbacks. We look at chances where the ball is played out from the center backs out to Hisai. What happens here is that Borini doesn't get there. He combines with Callejon, breaks into the box, delivers a cross in. Doesn't lead to nothing, but it is a dangerous position for a fullback to be in. We look at another opportunity where, again, it's just Hisai getting the ball, Callejon making that darting run from central areas, and we'll get to that later on, how that was impactful. But again, just getting there, obviously he's tracked and it doesn't lead to much, but again, it's a sign of danger. We think about Koulibaly switching the ball out to Mario Rui. Suso doesn't get closer to him. What happens there is that now it forces Calabria to step to the left back, and what happens is that it allows Insigne to pick up the ball in this dangerous pocket. Then he picks it up and he's able to flash a shot inches wide of the net. However, when you think about it as a whole, that was how the fullbacks really did get forward. Napoli's other chances stemmed. There was only one later on in the first half where Hamšík switched the ball out to Insigne, and what happens there is that Milic dropped off for the first time in the half, picked it up, and was able to force Donnarumma into a save. But besides that, Napoli were only finding from open play positions of space in those wider areas, and that was down to Milan's shape, and Milan deserved credit for that. When you think about how Napoli went about it, Napoli often went to press. They looked to win the ball higher up the pitch. They wanted to get the ball in those dangerous areas, and Milan's insistence to play out the back did force them to come forward. However, it was a bit disjointed. It wasn't as cohesive as you would expect. There were times where simply the two center backs would have the ball. Milic would look to press one. You'd have Hamšík step out onto Bilia, and then you have the wider players focus on the fullbacks and the shuttlers focus on the shuttlers. That meaning Zielinski focusing on Kessie, and then you'd have right over here Alan focusing on Bonaventura. But as a whole, that did help Milan play out the back. The center backs were able to move the ball forward. They always had a numerical advantage. So that was one way that Napoli went about it. But the thing about Milan playing out the back was, although they did play out the back, they never really created chances in the first half from that type of play. They would often get caught in wider areas. They would often lead to fouls, but they were never able to push forward as a unit by playing out the back, and it always felt like a risk throughout. But that was one way that they did go about it, and that way did lead to the goal that we'll get to in a second. The other way that they did go about it was that they would have the player drop off and Bilia. They would have Milic step forward. They would have the center back spread out. They'd have Callejon and Insigne push forward. If the ball went out to a fullback, one shuttler would push across. So there's a fullback. You'd have, let's say, Alan push out to the Ricardo Rodriguez, and then you have Hamsik shift across to cover his marker. And that was how they closed down spaces. That worked more effectively because then they were able to really negate Milan from playing out the back, force them into errors, force them to concede possession, and that was a big issue. But for Milan, when they try to negate that, sometimes they just have Bonaventura drop a bit deeper to pick up the ball, and Alan wasn't willing to make that run forward, and that was how they kind of got out of that, but still no real progression as to how they would play out the back. And that's why a lot of people were questioning why Milan were so insistent on playing proactive football in such a big game when they looked nervy in those tighter positions, when it looked like perhaps they needed to ease their way into this, because it did lead to some issues throughout the game. On several occasions, you have Lucas Bilia picking up the ball. In the earlier stages, Alan steps to him. The foul is, he wins the ball, slides it into Callejon. Callejon doesn't score, but again, a warning sign. Zielinski stepping to him, winning the ball, cutting across Kessie, firing his shot over the net. Still warning signs. You look at how they ended up scoring their first goal, Napoli. What happens is that Musacchio plays a poor pass out of the back, and what Musacchio plays it out to Bilia. Milic tries to press him, doesn't work out, but then Zielinski's right in there behind him. Hamsik picks up the ball, slides it wide to Callejon. Callejon pulls it back for Zielinski, who comes across his marker, and he's able to score the goal. So when you think about how Milan played out the back, there were some worries, but however, there were some rewards. When we get to the rewards, again, we have Napoli dropping off. The two goals that they do score, it stems from pressing, and it shows how Napoli approached the game and why their pressing didn't really work out for them either. If we look at the first goal, what happens is it's the example where they kind of sit off and they don't really press their marker. Hamsik takes a while to get out to Bilia, and what happens is Bilia is able to play the diagonal out to Suso. Suso cuts across Mario Rui, and he cuts across Zielinski, delivers the long diagonal behind the defense for Borini. Borini nods it back to Bonaventura. A great finish, but again, like I said, not putting enough pressure on Bilia, who did struggle when he was pressed, and Napoli were conceded a goal because they couldn't stop Suso cutting in. He offered them some problems, and again, a great goal from Bonaventura. However, when Napoli did look to press them, it did lead to the second goal in the second half. And how did that come about? What happens here is that you have Napoli pressing the center backs, and the ball is clipped out from Donnarumma to Calabria, and that forces Zielinski to come across. What happens there is that when he does come across, the ball is played to Kessie, who is tracked by Hamsik and is able to play it back, and Higuain drops off now. So Higuain drops off, picks up the ball, plays the diagonal out to Borini. Borini picks up the ball, and then he ends up, as Milan push forward, drops it off to Bilia. Bilia's able to clip that ball back into play for Suso, who lays it off for Calabria, breaking infield, and he's able to fire a shot past the keeper because Calabria isn't tracked by Insigne. It was a great move by Milan. They were able to bypass the pressing. They were able to switch the route of play, get Billy on the ball. And again, how do they attack the space? They play the diagonals in behind the Napoli defense, force the fullbacks to do some work. They don't. And then there's no one tracking the runner breaking into the box. No one tracked Calabria. No one tracked Bonaventura. Now Napoli are in some danger. They do get the goal that we mentioned before regarding the pressing, and then we see some changes occur. What changes do happen? They end up bringing on Mertens. They end up taking off Hamsik, so then they move to a 4-2-3-1. What happens there is now you have, obviously, Zielinski and Alan in midfield. Milan are dropping off a bit narrower, 4-5-1, running out of gas. And when they do that, what happens? Higuain drops off, wider players tuck in a bit, and they're just trying to contain space. But what happens here is that Napoli don't really do anything that jaw-dropping to change the manner of the game. Because when you think about the second goal, it comes from a corner kick. Zielinski is able to fire the volley instantly past Donnarumma, where it is Donnarumma's mistake for coming off his line a bit, and that was a big error for him. And then what happens after that is that we see another change. Zielinski comes off for Diawara. But what we think about what Napoli were doing so well in the second half, obviously they were retaining the ball. Obviously they were getting the fullbacks forward. But a lot of it stemmed from Callejon making those darting runs in behind. And we see a chance where he did tee up Zielinski, where he made that darting run to get the ball. Zielinski's breaking forward. He plays it across. Zielinski fires a shot wide. That was before the second goal. But we think about when Mertens comes on. What Mertens offers is just that ability to drop into pockets of space, to create space for Milic up front, moving in, dropping into those pockets, pushing out wide, creating space for his teammates. And that was how they really did get themselves forward. We think about the third goal, and what is it? It does stem from Alan breaking in behind and playing it across to Mertens, but Mertens ended up starting the play. And how did he start the play? Well, it's a pass from Luperto, who did come on for Mario Rui. And what happens here is that Milan did make changes as well. They brought on Laxalt, they brought on Bakayoko. The run that is made by Mertens does stem things off. He darts into that space to get the ball, drags Bakayoko, drags Calabria with him. He's able to push it across for Milic, and then Milic is able to push it across to Alan, and that's how the play stems. But again, just being able to drift into that space, drag markers with you, that was the movement that we weren't seeing from Napoli in the first half. Him dropping off into those pockets of spaces to pick up the ball and link play with his teammates. We weren't seeing that. And yes, Milan did show signs of fatigue. They were tiring, but however you want to put it, the pressing from Napoli eventually paid off. When we look at this game as a whole, Milan had their shape well. They were able to play out the back, but they didn't really create chances from that route, and they were running the risk of being picked off near their box, and eventually Napoli's pressing did pay off. As for Napoli, they struggled in the first half, weren't connecting passes, only found the routes out in wider areas. But as the game wore on, as Milan tired, they did eventually press and dispossess Bilia to score the goal. Zielinski did score another great goal, and bringing on Mertens allowed them to create space, allowed Napoli to create space in the final third, and that's how things paid off for them. But let me know what you guys think. Should Napoli contend for the title this season? Will Milan finish in the top four? And will Mertens finally start for Napoli? Meet me in the comments below. Don't forget I upload videos every day, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And that was your daily dose of the InnerViews.